My father always told me, if a deal looks too good to be true, it usually is. I should have listened. I moved into the Victorian on Blackwood Drive because the rent was $400 a month. In this economy, in this city, that's not a price, it's a miracle. The landlord, a nervous man with twitching fingers, didn't even ask for a security deposit. He just handed me the keys and told me one thing. Don't open the basement door. The humidity ruins the seal. I laughed it off. I thought he was just an eccentric old man worried about mold. I was wrong. The first 3 nights were quiet. Too quiet. On the 4th night, I heard it. It started as a low vibration, a hum that I felt in my teeth. It was coming from right beneath my bedroom floorboards. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The house groaned as the temperature dropped, and then the sound changed. It wasn't a hum anymore. It was a whimper. It sounded like a child, or maybe a wounded dog, trapped behind a heavy wall. I stayed perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Something was clawing at the underside of the floor. Not a mouse, not a rat. These were deep, heavy gouges. The wood actually splintered beneath my rug. Is someone there? I whispered. The scratching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath with me. Then came the scream. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was a high-pitched, metallic shriek, like a jet engine tearing itself apart. It ripped through the floorboards, vibrating the glass in my windows until they rattled in their frames. It lasted for 10 seconds, and then nothing. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife, staring at the hallway door. The next morning, I found the first sign. I went into the kitchen to make coffee, and I saw it. The basement door, the one the landlord told me to never touch, was standing a half-inch ajar, just a sliver of total, absolute blackness peeking out from the frame. I walked toward it, my hand trembling. I told myself it was just the wind. I told myself the house was settling. I reached for the handle, but then I saw the floor. Right in front of the door, in the thick dust of the hallway, were footprints, but they weren't feet. They looked like needles, 3-toed marks pressed deep into the wood, as if whatever made them weighed 500 pounds. And they didn't lead away from the door. They lead inside. Something had been out in the house while I was sleeping, and it had gone back down to wait for the sun to set. I couldn't just leave. I had spent every cent I had on the first month's rent and the moving truck. I was trapped in this Victorian nightmare, and the thing in the basement knew it. I decided to be smart, or at least as smart as a terrified man can be. I bought a cheap, motion-activated security camera from the hardware store. It was one of those small, black cubes with a tiny red light that blinked like a heartbeat. I set it up in the hallway, pointing directly at the basement door. Catch you now, I whispered to the empty house. My own voice felt thin, brittle like dry leaves. That night, I didn't go to sleep. I sat in my bed, staring at my phone screen, watching the live feed of the hallway. The house was a graveyard of shadows. The only thing moving was the dust dancing in the dim light of the street lamp outside. 1 a.m. Nothing. 2 a.m. The floorboards groaned, but the door remained shut. At 3:14 a.m., the camera alert chirped. My heart hit my throat. I stared at the screen. The basement door didn't open. It bent. The wood groaned as if something massive was leaning against it from the other side. Then it happened. The door didn't swing wide. It just slid open an inch. No sound, no creak, just a silent gap of absolute darkness. And then a hand came out. It wasn't a hand. It was a pale, translucent, spider-like limb. It was impossibly long, with too many joints. The fingers were like needles, tapping against the hardwood floor. Tap, tap, tap. I watched, paralyzed, as the thing pulled itself out of the gap. It didn't have a face, not a real one. It was just a pale, stretched mask of skin with two deep, black pits where eyes should be. It was fast. 1 second it was by the door, and the next, it was blurred. It moved like a glitch in a video game, flickering across the hallway. It didn't walk. It skittered, its limbs moving in a way that defied physics. Suddenly, it stopped. It was standing right in front of the camera. It leaned in, its pale, hairless head filling the entire screen. I could see the wet, gray veins beneath its skin. It wasn't looking at the camera. It was sniffing it. I heard a sound through my phone speaker. A low, wet clicking. Click, click, click. And then, the scream. It wasn't a jet engine this time. It was my voice. Is someone there? The thing shrieked. It had mimicked my voice perfectly. The same tone, the same tremor of fear. The screen went black. The thing had crushed the camera with a single, lightning-fast strike. I was sitting in the dark in my bedroom, and I heard it. Skitter, skitter, skitter. It wasn't in the hallway anymore. It was in the vent, right above my head. Is someone there? It screamed from the ceiling, my own voice mocking me in the dark. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The sound from the vent above my bed was a wet, rhythmic dragging. Slither, thud, slither, thud. My own voice was still echoing in my ears. That perfect, twisted mimicry of my fear. Is someone there? The thing whispered again from the darkness of the metal duct. It wasn't a question. It was a hook. It was trying to get me to speak, to make a sound, to give it a target. I gripped my kitchen knife, so hard my knuckles turned white. My palms were slick with sweat. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. The screws on the vent cover, they were turning. Slowly, silently. The metal heads were rotating. Something was unscrewing them from the inside. 1, 2, 3. The last screw hit the floor. The metal grate didn't fall. It was held by those pale, needle-like fingers. A face began to emerge from the black hole in the ceiling. It was stretched, like wet leather pulled over a skull. No nose, just two small, pulsing slits. Its skin was so thin, I could see the black fluid moving in its veins. It moved with a speed that the human I can't track. 1 second it was in the ceiling. The next, it was crunched into the corner of the room, near the ceiling. It clung to the wallpaper like a massive, pale insect. Its limbs were too long, too many joints, folding and unfolding as it adjusted its weight. It let out a short, sharp burst of sound that shattered the light bulb of my bedside lamp. I scrambled off the bed, tripping over my own feet. I hit the floor hard. I could hear it moving, shifting above me. It didn't walk. It teleported, moving from one wall to the other in a blur of white skin. Click, click, click. I felt a cold, damp breath on the back of my neck. I swung the knife behind me, cutting only the air. Our rent is 2. Cheap, the thing rasped. It was repeating what I had thought earlier. It wasn't just hearing me, it was sensing my memories. Or maybe it had been watching me from the basement since the very first day. I bolted for the door. I didn't look back. I burst into the hallway, my heart screaming in my chest. I reached the front door. I grabbed the handle. The deadbolt wouldn't turn. It felt like it was fused to the frame. I looked down at the keyhole. It was filled with a thick gray wax. The thing had sealed me in. From the end of the dark hallway, near the basement door, I heard a low, guttural growl. It wasn't in my bedroom anymore. It was standing right behind me. Do not open the door, it shrieked, using the landlord's voice this time. I turned around and saw those two black pits of eyes staring at me from the shadows. It was crouched, ready to spring. I didn't wait for it to spring. I bolted down the hallway toward the kitchen. My feet felt heavy, like I was running through deep water. Every time I looked back, I saw a flash of that pale, translucent skin flickering in the shadows. It wasn't just chasing me. It was playing with me. I burst into the kitchen, the smell of old copper and rotting meat hitting me like a physical blow. I lunged for the back door, the one leading to the small garden. I grabbed the handle and yanked. It wasn't just locked. The wood felt wrong. I looked closer, and my blood turned to ice. The door wasn't made of oak anymore. It was covered in a thick, pulsating membrane of gray skin. It was fusing with the wall, the edges of the door disappearing into the plaster. The house was changing. Help. Someone. Anyone. I screamed, my voice cracking. I looked out the window, but the glass was blurred, distorted, as if I was looking through a thick layer of oil. The streetlights outside were gone, replaced by a dull, red glow that didn't belong to this world. Something hit the ceiling right above me. The plaster cracked, a fine white dust raining down onto my hair. Help. Someone. Anyone. The voice came from the pantry, but it wasn't mine. It was a perfect, mechanical loop of my own scream. Click, click, click. The creature crawled out from under the kitchen table. It didn't have a skeleton, not a normal one. Its limbs bent backwards, snapping and popping as it squeezed its massive frame through the narrow gap. It stood up, towering over me, its head brushing the light fixture. The rent is too cheap, it rasped, the voice now a distorted, layered chorus of everyone who had ever lived in this house. I backed away, my hand hitting the kitchen counter. I felt something cold, sharp, the butcher knife. I grabbed it, swinging it in a wide arc. I felt the blade bite into its skin, but there was no blood. Instead, a thick black smoke poured out of the wound. The creature didn't even flinch. It just looked at the cut. Then, the wound closed. The skin knitted back together in a second, smoother than before. It tilted its head, those black pits of eyes boring into my soul. Very dangerous, it whispered, using my own internal thoughts. Suddenly, it lunged. It didn't use its hands. It used its ribcage. The chest of the creature split open, revealing rows of long, needle-like teeth made of bone. It wasn't a mouth. It was a trap. I dove to the side, crashing into the refrigerator. The creature hit the wall with enough force to shatter the wood, its pale limbs sinking deep into the plaster. I scrambled toward the only place left, the stairs leading up. But as I reached the first step, I heard a sound from the top of the landing. Skitter, skitter, skitter. There wasn't just one. Is someone there? Another voice shrieked from the darkness above. I didn't go into the basement. I wasn't that stupid. I stayed in the kitchen, gripping the butcher knife, staring at the heavy oak door. The scratching from the other side had stopped, but the silence was worse. Cling, cling, cling. It was the sound of my phone. A text from the landlord. I'm coming over. Don't leave the house. We need to fix the leak. The leak? The only thing leaking was my sanity. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the fog outside. A rusted truck pulled into the driveway. It was him, Mr. Henderson. He didn't look nervous anymore. He looked focused. He didn't knock. He used his key and stepped inside. He was carrying a heavy canvas bag that smelled like raw bleach and ammonia. You're still here, he said, his voice flat. I told you not to touch the door. What is in there, Henderson? I hissed, pointing the knife at his chest. That thing, it's using my voice. It smashed my camera. Henderson didn't look at the knife. He looked at the basement door. He looked sad. It's not a thing, he whispered. It's my son. My blood turned to ice. You're what? He was sick. The doctors, they couldn't help. So I found another way. A ritual. Something from the old woods. It saved his life, but it changed his hunger. Henderson walked toward the door, reaching into his bag. He pulled out a massive, blood-soaked chunk of raw beef. He hasn't eaten in 3 days. That's why he's agitated. That's why he mimics you. He wants to know his food before he takes it. Henderson reached for the bowl on the basement door. Wait, don't open it. I screamed, but it was too late. Henderson slid the bolt back. It's okay, Leo. Henderson whispered into the darkness. Daddy's here. I brought you a treat. For a second, there was nothing. Then, a pale, needle-thin finger wrapped around the edge of the door. The sound didn't come from the basement. It came from the ceiling. I looked up. The creature, Leo, wasn't in the basement. He had escaped through the vents hours ago. He was clinging to the light fixture right above Henderson's head. Daddy's here. The creature shrieked, using Henderson's own voice. Before Henderson could look up, the creature dropped. It didn't use a knife. It used its split, serrated chest. It landed on Henderson's shoulders, the bone teeth snapping shut around his neck with a sound like dry branches breaking. Henderson didn't even have time to scream. The creature was too fast, too powerful. It dragged him, kicking and twitching, toward the open basement door. The bag of meat hit the floor. Henderson's blood sprayed across the white tiles, hot and steaming. The creature stopped at the threshold. It turned its pale, faceless head towards me. The rent is paid, it rasped, using Henderson's dying breath. And then it dragged him down into the dark. The basement door slammed shut, but there was no click of a lock, just the sound of something heavy, wet and limp being dragged down the wooden stairs. Thump, thump, thump. Henderson was gone. My landlord, the man who had built this nightmare, was now just meat in the dark. I stood in the kitchen, the butcher knife shaking in my hand. The smell of copper and bleach was overwhelming. I looked at the front door. It was wide open, the night air chilling the sweat on my forehead. I didn't think. I ran. I burst through the door, my boots hitting the gravel of the driveway. I didn't look back. I didn't care about my clothes, my laptop, my life inside that house. I just wanted the road. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. My hands were slick with Henderson's blood, the metal keys sliding against my skin. Come on, come on, come on, I screamed. The remote clicked. The lights flashed. I ripped the door open and dove inside, slamming it shut and locking it in one motion. I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, a beautiful, mechanical scream that gave me hope. I shifted into reverse, ready to floor it. But then, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house was dark, but the attic window, the one right above my bedroom, was open. A pale, thin shape was perched on a ledge. It wasn't Leo. It was Henderson. No, it couldn't be Henderson. I saw him die. I heard his neck snap. The shape leaned out into the moonlight. It was Henderson's body, but it was moving like a puppet. Its limbs were bent at impossible angles, its head lolling to one side, held up by those translucent, needle-like fingers that were stitched into his skin. The creature, Leo, was behind him, using his father's corpse like a shield or a TOY. Daddy's here, the thing shrieked, the voice now a wet, gurgling mess of Henderson's and mine. Suddenly, the body of the landlord was thrown from the window. It hit the roof of my car with a sickening metal crunch. The windshield shattered. Glass sprayed across my face, cutting my cheeks. I screamed, shielding my eyes, through the cracks in the glass. I saw it. The creature didn't jump. It blurred. It was on the hood of my car in a heartbeat. Its pale, hairless face was inches from mine, separated only by the broken glass. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its hunger. It tilted its head, its chest mouth beginning to unzip, revealing those bone teeth. The lease is not over, it whispered, my own voice coming back at me, calm and terrifying. It raised its long, needle fingers and began to peel back the shattered glass, one shard at a time, with the precision of a surgeon. I grabbed the gear shift, but a pale limb shot through the broken window, pinning my arm to the seat. The grip was like an industrial vice. "Please," I sobbed. "Please, let me go." The creature paused. It leaned in closer, its skin smelling of old dust and rotting meat. "Please, let me go," it repeated, tasting the words. And then, it did something I didn't expect. It didn't bite. It didn't scream. It reached into the pocket of Henderson's coat, which was still draped over the hood, and pulled out a set of keys. The house keys. It dropped them into my lap, right onto my blood-stained jeans. "Fix the leak," it commanded, using the landlord's flat, professional tone. It wasn't looking for a meal anymore. It had found a new provider. I stared at the keys in my lap. They were heavy, cold, and smeared with Henderson's coolant blood. The metal glinted under the dome light of the car, reflecting the nightmare I was living. I looked up through the shattered windshield. The creature, Leo, was still perched on the hood. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just existed, like a gargoyle made of pale meat. Its long, needle-like fingers were still hooked into the dashboard, holding the car down with impossible strength. I can't," I whisper, my voice breaking. "I can't stay here. I can't." The thing mocked, the pitch of its voice shifting from mine to Henderson's in a sickening slide. Suddenly, the car shifted. The weight of Henderson's corpse on the roof pressed down, the metal groaning and buckling. I could see his lifeless hand dangling over the side window, swinging like a pendulum. Tap, tap, tap. The creature leaned forward, its face inches from the broken glass. It reached out one long finger and traced the line of a deep cut on my cheek. The touch was freezing, like ice-cold needles. "The leak," it rasped. "Fix. IT." It wasn't a request. It was an order. The creature blurred again, a flash of white skin, and it was gone. 1 second it was on the hood. The next, it was a shadow disappearing back through the attic window. I was alone in the car. The engine was still running, but the wheels just spun in the gravel. Henderson's body was wedged under the rear axle now, acting like a gruesome wheel chock. The smell of burning rubber and raw meat began to fill the cabin. I looked at the house. It sat there, dark, hungry, its front door still wide open like a waiting mouth. I had two choices. I could sit in this car until the gas ran out, or I could pick up those keys. My hand shook as I reached for them. The blood on the metal was sticky now like glue. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching on the glass. The silence of the night was absolute. No crickets, no wind, just the ticking of the cooling engine. I walked toward the porch. Every step felt like a mile. I reached the front door. The hallway was a corridor of shadows. I could hear a sound coming from the kitchen. A wet, rhythmic, slapping. Slurp, crack, slurp. I walked toward the kitchen, my knife held out in front of me. The creature was there. It was sitting at the kitchen table, exactly where Henderson used to sit. It was eating. It had the bag of raw beef Henderson had brought. It wasn't using its hands. It was using that horrific chest mouth. It looked up at me. Its pale skin was stained dark red. "Coffee is cold," it whispered, using a voice I had never heard before. A woman's voice. Gentle, sweet, probably his mother's. It pushed a mug across the table toward me. A mug I bought only 3 days ago. "Fix. IT," it repeated. I looked at the sink. The faucet was dripping. Drip, drip, drip. I realized then that fixing the leak wasn't about the plumbing. It was about the life in this house. It needed someone to play the part. It needed a landlord. It needed a father. I walked to the sink. I picked up a wrench from the counter. My hands were still shaking, but the creature watched me with a strange, terrifying patience. I turned the bolt. The dripping stopped. The creature let out a low, satisfied click. "Good. Tenant," it whispered. I realized with a jolt of pure terror that I wasn't going to die tonight. I was going to stay here. I was going to feed it. And eventually, when I got too old, or too too slow, it would fix me too. It has been 7 days. 7 days of silence, broken only by the wet, rhythmic sounds from the attic. I don't look in the mirror anymore. The man looking back has sunken eyes and skin the color of old parchment. I spend my hours cleaning, scrubbing the blood out of the floorboards until my fingernails bleed, polishing the silverware, fixing the things that don't even need fixing. Because if the house is quiet, Lou is quiet. I call him Lou now. It's shorter than Leo. It feels more intimate, like we're a team. At 10 a.m., the sound of a gravel-crunching engine broke the stillness. My heart leapt, a spark of the old me screaming for help. I ran to the window, pulling back the heavy lace curtain. It was the mailman, a young guy, maybe 20, wearing a bright blue uniform that looked too clean for this world. He was whistling. He walked up the path, a small stack of envelopes in his hand. He didn't know. He couldn't see the shattered glass I had swept into the bushes. He couldn't smell the bleach that barely hid the scent of Henderson's rotting truck in the garage. Help! I mouthed against the glass, but no sound came out. My throat felt like it was filled with dry sand. The mailman reached the porch. Thump, thump, thump. He reached for the mailbox next to the door. Click, click, click. The sound came from the ceiling vent directly above the porch. I saw a flash of pale, needle-thin fingers. Good morning. A voice chirped. It was in my voice, but it wasn't me. It was Lou, perched on the roof, hidden by the gutter. The mailman looked up, squinting against the sun. Oh, hey there. Didn't see you up there. Working on the roof. Working on the roof. The thing repeated, its tone perfect, friendly, inviting. Yeah, looks like a big job. The mailman laughed, reaching into his bag. Got some bills for a Mr. Henderson. Is he around? There was a long, suffocating silence. I watched through the glass, my hand trembling on the windowsill. Henderson is in the back, the creature whispered. He is fixing the leak. The mailman nodded, tucking the mail into the box. Right on. Well, have a good one, man. Don't fall off. He turned to leave. This was it. My last chance. I grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the side table and slammed it against the window. Crack. The glass spiderwebbed, but didn't break. The mailman stopped. He turned around, looking at the window, looking directly at me. Everything okay in there? He asked, his smile fading. Before I could hit the glass again, a pale limb shot down from the roof like a white whip. It wrapped around the mailman's neck before he could even blink. Is everything okay? Lou shrieked, no longer hiding the hunger in his voice. The mailman's eyes went wide. He tried to scream, but those needle fingers were already deep in his throat, sealing his windpipe. He was dragged, vertically, up the side of the house. His boots kicked against the siding for 3 seconds. Thump, thump, thump. And then silence. A single blue cap drifted down from the sky, landing softly on the blood-stained gravel. I stood there, paralyzed. A minute later, the attic door opened. The creature, Lou, descended the stairs slowly. It wasn't blurred this time. It moved with a heavy, satisfied grace. It walked up to me and dropped something at my feet. The mailman's watch. It was still ticking. Nil. Tenant. Is late? Lou whispered, using the mailman's young, cheerful voice. It leaned in, pressing its cold, featureless face against mine. Fix. The watch, it commanded. I picked it up. My hands were steady now. I didn't feel fear. I just felt tired. I walked to the kitchen table, sat down, and began to wind the watch. The watch was still ticking in my hand. Tick, tick, tick. But I wasn't fixing it anymore. I was waiting. Lou was in the attic, making those wet, tearing sound with the mailman. He thought I was broken. He thought I was just another piece of furniture in his father's collection. He was wrong. I waited until the house went silent, until the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, bloody, shadows across the kitchen floor. I stood up. My legs felt like lead, but my mind was a white hot, screaming, fire. I went to the garage. Henderson's truck was still there, smelling of old oil and death. I reached in the back and pulled out 2 5-gallon cans of gasoline. The weight of them felt glorious. I walked back into the house, my boots squelching on the dried blood in the hallway. I started in the kitchen. I poured the fuel over the table, the chairs, the half-eaten bag of meat. The smell was sharp, beautiful, a chemical promise of freedom. I moved to the hallway. I soaked the lace curtains, the heavy oak door, the wallpaper that had watched me crumble for 7 days. Fix the leak. A voice hissed from the ceiling vent. It was Lou. He had heard the splashing. I'm fixing it, Lou. I yelled, my voice finally breaking through the dry sand in my throat. I'm fixing the hole. Damn thing. I ran to the basement door and dumped the rest of the second can down the stairs. The fumes were so thick I could barely see. My eyes were stinging. My lungs were burning, but I didn't stop. The sound from the attic was frantic now. Lou wasn't moving with grace anymore. He was panicking. He could smell it. I reached the front porch, the same place where the mailman had lost his life. I pulled a lighter from my pocket. It was Henderson's, a heavy silver, Zippo with a skull on the side. Tenant, stop, Lou shrieked, using my mother's voice. IT is cold, outside. He burst out of the attic hatch, his pale, translucent skin glowing in the dim light. He looked like a nightmare made of wax. He lunged at me, his needle fingers extended, a blur of white death. I flicked the lighter. The flame was tiny, orange, and perfect. Rinse due, you son of a bitch, I whispered. I dropped the lighter onto the gasoline-soaked porch. The world turned orange. The fire didn't just burn, it exploded. The gasoline-soaked wood went up like a torch. The heat hit me like a physical blow, knocking me backward off the porch and onto the gravel. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard, a high-pitched metallic wail that shattered the remaining windows of the house. Lou was trapped. He was on the stairs, his pale skin bubbling and blackening in seconds. He wasn't a god anymore. He was just a terrified, mutated animal. He tried to jump through the fire, but his long limbs caught on the burning curtains. He was a silhouette of flame, dancing a horrific, jerky jig in the hallway. Help, me, Daddy, he screamed, using every voice he had ever stolen. The mailman, the landlord, the woman, and me, all of them screaming at once in a discordant, hellish symphony. I backed away, watching the Victorian nightmare turn into a funeral pyre. The roof groaned, the heavy beams snapping like toothpicks. The house wasn't just burning, it was dying. I stood by the road, the heat melting the plastic on my boots. I watched until the second floor collapsed, burying the creature and its collection in a mountain of white-hot ash. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The heat was fading, replaced by the biting midnight chill. I stood by the edge of the road, watching the last of the Victorian skeleton collapse into a glowing orange grave. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional snap of a cooling timber. I was covered in soot. My lungs felt like they were filled with ground glass. But I was alive. I walked back to my car. The roof was still crushed from Henderson's body, the windshield a spiderweb of cracks. I brushed the glass off the driver's seat and climbed in. The engine groaned, sputtered, and then roared. I didn't look back at the ruins. I shifted into gear and floored it. I needed distance. I needed miles of asphalt between me and that patch of cursed earth. 5 miles, 10 miles, 20. The road was a dark ribbon under my headlights. I started to laugh, a ragged, hysterical sound that filled the cabin. I had done it. I had killed the house. I had killed Lou. I had fixed the leak with fire. I reached up to adjust the rear view mirror. It was tilted down from the struggle earlier. I gripped the plastic frame, and my heart stopped. The reflection didn't show the empty road behind me. In the dim, green glow of the dashboard lights, I saw a hand. A pale, translucent, needle-thin finger was resting on the back of my headrest. Just one. Fix. The mirror. A voice whispered. It wasn't Lou's voice. It wasn't Henderson's. It was mine, but not the terrified version. It was the calm, cold, predatory version I had become over that last week. I looked closer into the glass. My own eyes were staring back at me, but they weren't white anymore. They were turning amber, pulsing with a dull, rhythmic light. I looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. I looked at the back seat. Empty. Then I looked at my own reflection again. The needle finger wasn't behind me in the car. It was coming out of my neck. I reached back, my hand trembling, and I felt it. A cold, hard protrusion of bone growing right out of my spine. It was unfolding, stretching like a pale wing. The lease follows the tenant. My reflection whispered, its mouth not moving, but the words vibrating inside my skull. I tried to scream, but my chest mouth opened instead. Screech. The sound shattered the remaining glass in the car. I didn't stop the car. I couldn't. My foot was fused to the gas pedal, my skin beginning to turn that familiar, waxy white. I wasn't the survivor. I was the replacement. As I drove into the dark, I saw a sign for a small town, only 10 miles away. I started to sniff the air. I could smell them, the people in their warm, wooden houses. I could hear their voices, and I knew exactly which ones I wanted to steal. Is anyone there? I whispered to the empty road, practicing my new voice.